Greetings, music nerds, and welcome to Season 8 of the Music Makers and Soul Shakers podcast. This season is brought to you by our newest sponsors, Larrivee Guitars and Fishman Amplification. I'm your host, Steve Dawson, coming to you from the Hen House Studio in Nashville, Tennessee. This season, I'll be taking you on a journey down the many rabbit holes in the process of making great music. I'll be speaking to instrumentalists, songwriters, producers, up-and-comers through legendary veterans, and we'll go deep into their history and their process of creating unforgettable music. This show continues to be listener-supported. You can help keep the show going with a one-time donation or a Patreon subscription. And when you sign up for Patreon, you get an ad-free version of the show, as well as getting entered to win some killer prizes from our sponsors at the end of the season. We have an incredible Chase Bliss Lossy pedal up for grabs, as well as a Fishman acoustic guitar pickup and effects pedals, as well as a pedal from Union Tube and Transistor, and more. You can get links to all this and sign up now at makersandshakerspodcast.com. Meanwhile, many thanks to the sponsors for this season. Please check them out and let them know that I sent you. They are Larrivee Guitars, Fishman Pickups, Chase Bliss Pedals, Union Tube and Transistor, Spectra 1964, and the Hen House Hang. All right, thanks for tuning in, and let's get down to it. Howdy, music nerds, and welcome to episode number 166 of the podcast. On the show today is Bluegrass bassist, singer, songwriter Missy Raines. Before we get going here, I would just like to thank a couple of new supporters. The first person, I'm not 100% sure of his name exactly, but I believe it's Samuel Kralamael. That could be wrong. In fact, it probably is wrong. I'm an idiot. But thank you. And David Huskey. Thanks, you guys. I really appreciate it. You can support the show, as mentioned, with Patreon or a one-time donation. If you join the Patreon with even a few bucks a month, you will be automatically entered for our amazing prizes that are going to come at the end of the year. From Larrivee Guitars, Union Tube and Transistor, a wicked pedal from Chase Bliss, a bunch of stuff from Fishman. It is just an endless cavalcade of wicked prizes. So join the Patreon over at makersandshakerspodcast.com, help out the show, and win some stuff. All right, on the show today is Missy Raines. She dropped by here at the Hen House a couple months back to talk. She is one of the great bluegrass bassists out there. You know, bluegrass bass it's a kind of a funny thing. On the surface, it seems really simple. There's a way to do it, and there's a way to do it right. But there's a whole other level that you can get to. And when you hear someone like Junior Huskey do it, or Mike Bub, or Dennis Crouch, or Missy Raines, it's a real thing. There's a way that the really good players place their notes. There's a tone. And it all comes down to the bed that the bass players lay for the other players in the band to live in. And that's the hard part. And it's really hard to describe. But Missy does it. And once you get a chance to play with someone of that caliber, it becomes much clearer what a great bassist brings to the table. And she really is one of the best. She's been releasing albums under her own name since 1998. And her latest recording just came out a couple months ago. It's called Highlander, and it's a killer record that features her band Allegheny, as well as guests like Kathy Mattea, Michael Cleveland, awesome fiddle player, Darol Anger, also awesome, Rob Ickes, also awesome. He was just on the show a few weeks back. Make sure you check out that episode if you didn't hear it yet. Missy's from West Virginia. She's lucky enough to grow up in an area that had a really strong bluegrass scene that she got to experience firsthand. She's lived in Nashville for a long time now, and she's on the road a lot these days. She's won multiple IBMA awards for Bass Player of the Year, a lot actually, and has performed with bluegrass legends like Mac Wiseman, Peter Rowan, and Josh Graves. And aside from her accomplishments in the bluegrass world, Missy swerved over into some more experimental territory a few years back and had a band going called The New Hip, who made a couple of really incredible records worth checking out as well. And those feature her songwriting in a much less traditional bluegrass context. And I think it got her in a little bit of hot water with those bluegrassy folks, but that's okay. These days, she's pretty focused on traditional bluegrass again and has one of the best bands on the scene. So make sure you go see them if they're coming through your area. You can get all the latest news on Missy and her tour dates over at missyraines.com. And with that, please enjoy my conversation with Missy Raines. So the Seldom scene, that was what you would say like a big one for you. Were they around, I'm not sure where you grew up, but tell me about some of your early influences as far as like bands that you would have seen and been around.
Well, I grew up in West Virginia, but northeastern West Virginia, just across the state line from Cumberland, Maryland. So it was pretty far north as you can get in West Virginia. But the thing that was memorable about it was that it was such an easy, traffic-wise or just road-wise, I should say, it was an easy trip down to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And I say down because we were more of elevation rather than direction, because it was actually pretty much due east. But so that was an easy access. The roads leading into West Virginia, going the opposite way, southern and western. They were, when I was growing up, I mean, and they still are, they're just so mountainous and curvy, and took you forever to go anywhere. And so there wasn't a lot to get to. So we found ourselves going into D.C. and to southern Pennsylvania and northern Virginia and Maryland and those places to hear music. And as a result, many of the bands that came from that area or were situated in that area during that time were very influential to me, one of them being the Seldom Scene, which was basically based in the D.C. metropolitan area.
Who all was in that band? So that's Mike Aldridge. It's Chris Eldridge's dad was in it, right?
Yeah.
And who else was?
Ben Eldridge was banjo player. John Duffy, the original members, John Duffy, John Starling on guitar and lead singing, Tom Gray on bass, and that was the original band. That's the band that most influenced me. Before that band, John Duffy remains the sort of single central character of all these stories because there was a band called the Country Gentlemen, which also went on to last decades. But the original version of that band, the Country Gentlemen, also from that area, featured John Duffy, Charlie Waller, and Eddie Adcock on banjo, and Tom Gray also on bass. So these were... While I was actually too young to actually see them when that particular the four of them were together, I heard their music on stereo because my parents had all their albums, so I grew up listening to that. And then I did get to see them perform live in the 70s when everyone had moved on to different groups, but a festival promoter by the name of Carlton Haney would have what he called the Country Gentleman Story event at many of his festivals, when he would have all of the right bands booked there, Eddie's band, John's band, and Charlie and Tom. And so they would get together and have a bit of a reunion. And this happened maybe every year for a few years in the 70s. So
you would just book all the bands that consisted of members of the Country Gentlemen.
Yeah. And
it's a good way to do it.
Because I think he was very aware of the impact that band had, and he wasn't wrong. Here we are all these years later, and you can hear that influence in many people, and certainly the songs that they recorded. So I got to hear them, and those were two of the bands that were pretty important to me, along with our early Del McCoury. I mean, Del McCoury's from southern Pennsylvania.
Yeah, right.
And so I was watching Del McCoury and the Dixie Pals. This, of course, before his sons were born. And
so this is post Bill Monroe, pre having the Del McCoury band.
Oh yeah. And folks like Danny Paisley, but he was playing at the time with his dad, Bob Paisley, and Bob Paisley and Ted Lundy had a band called Southern Grass, and they dominated those days and played festivals and the scene, the circuit and so that sound, I kind of dub it a mid-Atlantic sound.
It's interesting how regionally strong bluegrass is from that area, like the Washington, the D.C. area, and even like somebody like Bill Vorndick is from there too, like somebody that was involved in the technical side of the music. But
yeah. Interestingly, Eddie Adcock, who I actually worked for in the mid '80s, I got to work for him. Eddie knew Bill back in those days. Bill was a big fan of Eddie's, and Eddie actually taught him a lot about doing sound in those early days.
Yeah, because he started out doing live sound. Was that his vibe in the early days, right?
Yeah.
Especially in that generation, it seems like there was like a huge amount of bands and musicians coming out of that area of the States.
Part of what was happening at the time for radio was quite big then, and there was an FM public radio station, WAMU, which still exists now online, but at the time, earlier than the 70s, but what my memory is mostly of the 70s, they were playing bluegrass all day long. They were playing bluegrass during drive time. So you could be sitting basically in a traffic jam on the Beltway of DC, listening to Flat and Scruggs on the radio on a 100,000 watt FM
commercial station.
Yeah, it was a public station, but it was a very big, 100,000 watt, had a far reach.
Was that reflected in was a very large audience around for bluegrass concerts and festivals in that area too?
I think so, yeah, because they were, this radio station was supporting this bluegrass, obviously. And, so you'd hear All Things Considered, and then you'd hear Flat and Scruggs again, or what, and
get back to the bluegrass.
Yeah, Morning Edition, and then more bluegrass. And it was a lifeline. And also you have to remember that at the time, the Seldom Scene was probably one of the, if not the top, billed bluegrass bands of that era, and they had a regular Thursday night gig at the Birchmere.
They weren't touring musicians, right? Those guys all had day jobs, didn't they?
They all had careers for sure that were other than bluegrass, other than playing music. They didn't tour the way you and I might think of touring for sure, but they did play more than the average put together part-time band.
Right. They weren't just weekend warriors. They were they were high caliber.
But it is true that they all had serious jobs that they and families, and they weren't interested in leaving those situations. But
a weekly local gig was right up their alley.
A weekly local gig in a major city that also had major support on the air for the kind of music that you're playing. You're going, there was a lot of bluegrass in that part of the world. When I was growing up, that time, to be frank, Nashville now has all these, folk and bluegrass and Americana and old-time musicians flocking here, and it's because it's a great environment, and I live here, and it's wonderful. But in those days, that was not the scene here at all for that kind of music. Everybody wanted to be, at least on the East Coast, you came to D.C.
So the bluegrass in the States, in the sort of eastern half of the States, because there was sort of a whole different California scene going on.
Oh, sure.
But on this side of the Mississippi, it was sort of more centered around that area. That's so weird.
There was definitely a lot happening. And also, I think that what contributed to a lot of things that was happening during that time was I mentioned that the festival promoter, Carlton Haney, was putting on, I don't know how many a year, but I'm going to say maybe 4, 5 to 6 festivals a year at least at the time, and started and most of those festivals ranged from either North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania. There again, these events, these multi-day festivals that had just started, maybe a few years before. Like the first one that Carlton started, multi-day event, was 1965. So these were in their heyday by the early 70s, and they were sort of concentrated in that area. They were happening everywhere, but they were definitely concentrated. And I can remember early times of being at, say, Watermelon Park in Berryville, Virginia, which is not all that far outside of D.C., but very rural. I can remember being at one of those festivals and being a kid and doing kid things like, wandering around the campground, noting all the different license plates.
Nice.
Like you do
activity
when you're a kid. And I remember seeing license plates from Colorado and Utah,
exotic locales.
And then these weren't rental. This was a time when people actually got in their car and they drove because they heard about this event. And they made the trip.
So were your parents hardcore bluegrass fans? Is that how you ended up going to these festivals?
That is how I got here.
Were they musicians?
Not really, although my dad did buy the bass that I have today that I play. Really? He bought it for himself.
Really?
And he did play, but I don't think he ever considered himself a musician.
Did he have bands or anything?
No. Well, there was a band that we all played with, and he bought the bass to play with that band, and I was playing guitar in this band. And it was a family band that we sort of they welcomed us in. And apparently my dad was playing. I mean, I do remember this, but I didn't know the story until the young girl that was also in the band reminded me, Kathy Davis. She said, yeah, apparently your dad was playing the washtub bass, which he had built for himself, and then the adults apparently started talking. Well, if we're going to we might be getting some more gigs. This could turn into something. You probably ought to get a real bass. And apparently that conversation led to my dad bringing home this bass and bringing it into the house. And that was the first time I'd ever thought about playing the bass, was when it suddenly was in my living room. And
how old were you when that happened?
I think I was I think when it came into the house, I was probably about 10 or 11. And
so pretty small. You were a little kid.
Yeah.
A bass probably looks gigantic at that point.
Yeah. And there's pictures, and it is kind of gigantic, but...
That's not a full-size bass, though, right? It's like a 3/4 or something?
Yeah, it's just a 3/4.
Yeah. So what's your story as far as playing the bass? So you played guitar. Were you like a musical kid? Were you playing other instruments and stuff? Or was the bass kind of like your thing right from the get-go?
No, I started playing piano, and that was I was hearing and listening to bluegrass on the stereo from my parents, but also I had 3 older siblings, and so I was also hearing, because my parents were very, open they wanted anything that anyone wanted to play at any time. So they all had different interests. So I was hearing classical, and I was hearing Southern rock, and I was hearing pop music, but primarily what I was hearing was bluegrass. So I just felt very musical, and I was always thinking about music. So I started playing piano, probably because that was the instrument in the house, because we had been given a piano.
The least bluegrassy instrument you could get your hands on.
It was an instrument. And I started playing the piano, and then I asked for guitar, and I got a guitar.
Yeah.
And then I got a better guitar. But then the bass came into the house. And once I started playing bass, I just grabbed what little guitar knowledge I had at that point and transferred it to the bass and liked it a lot. And then I didn't really think about the guitar anymore, and I definitely didn't think about the piano anymore.
Okay. And that was it for guitar?
Yeah, unfortunately. No, I play guitar a lot more now, not for public consumption, but I use the guitar a lot, and sort of wish I hadn't stopped playing it. I wish I hadn't stopped playing piano as well. These were choices that should not have been left to a 10-year-old.
Right, exactly. Although forcing a 10-year-old to take piano lessons isn't probably the most productive use of your time either.
It's not a good idea, but still.
Okay, so you're about 10 or 11 or whatever, and this bass comes into the house. You're totally enthralled by it, by the sound, or just by the way it looked, or what
The
was
way
it?
it felt.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the way it...
How did you know how it was supposed to be played?
Oh, I really had no idea. But I had... so the main person who helped me, and he helped me in so many other ways, was there was a fiddle player, an old-time fiddle player that we jammed with every week. His name was Ray Shreve, and he taught me actually to play drop thumb style guitar as well. So I did stay with the guitar a little bit, but only because Ray made it so daggone cool. Like he would sit and play the blues on the guitar. So he showed me how to do that. But he was a great fiddle player, and then he showed me what to play on the bass. And so
He was a bit of a bass player.
he just was a great musician who, only got to play for fun his whole life because he had a family and he worked really hard. He was a laborer, and the idea of a life of music, I just was never an option for him.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was however old I was, but I mean, I remember my little kid thinking that he was probably 85 years old.
He's probably 43.
Exactly. No, but actually he probably was like in his 50s or 60s.
Yeah.
Because he was one of the oldest of us all. But
Right.
he was older than my folks. But yeah, when you're a kid, everybody, you think they're 100 years
I always
old.
call my daughter out on that. She's like, we had a sub today who was really old. It's like, it's probably way younger than I am, but thanks. I would imagine like playing a bass as your first instrument when you're that age, a fretless instrument would be frustrating. Just the process of learning it would be really difficult. Did you find it to be crazy hard in that way? Just like getting that to get like the intonation thing together and like...
Oh, I mean, when you're a kid, you don't think about that stuff. I mean, you don't worry about it.
But how do you know where to put your hand if there's no fret?
You don't. That's my point. No, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is like that. I mean, sure, that's all valid, but I don't remember frustration. I remember just going for it, and if it sounded good, then it was good, and then if it didn't, then I changed it, and there wasn't judgment in between, which is the beauty of being a child, and
Were you aware of what the role of the bass was, or did you just think it was a cool instrument?
Well, so that's when what happened then was that's where the early records of the Country Gentleman and then seeing the Seldom Scene really started to formulate my playing, because Tom Gray was the bass player for a lot of those early Country Gentleman records, and his style, particularly at that time, he was very busy player.
He was playing electric too, wasn't he? At some
he did play electric on maybe one or two songs later in the 70s with the Scene, but the Country Gentleman was all upright.
Okay,
and he doesn't really he didn't even want to play the electric when he did on one recording, but he was playing upright. But his background was like Dixieland jazz, and when he started listening to bluegrass, his biggest role model was George Shuffler.
Who was that?
George Shuffler was guitar player and bass player, played with Stanley Brothers.
Oh, okay.
And he also had that walking style on the bass. George is an iconic fingerstyle guitar player as well, but he was also this iconic bass player. And so Tom was emulating George Shuffler, who did this boom, 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 boom,
more
boom,
walking as opposed to like
sort
root
of a
fiving.
walking kind of root five instead of a root five. Sure. And Tom did this relentlessly on all these early recordings.
Yeah.
And and it was very exciting as a listener, and especially as a young listener. It was like, I want to do that because every note is there, and it's all this. I wasn't thinking about anything else. I just wanted to do that. So that's what I try to do.
Oh, cool.
And I was very fortunate. I got to meet Tom early on, and we became friends, and he became a mentor, and we're still friends today. And he talks about how he very much regrets a lot of the choices that he made in like how busy his playing was on some of that stuff. But it's classic.
But to you, it was super cool.
Oh, it was super cool.
Yeah.
But these days we would both have different ways of doing it, and but I still believe that the style that he played with that band helped to make it as classic and iconic as it is.
So what was the learning process for you like then? Like, did you play with your dad and stuff and like get it figured out that way? Or how do you start playing bass as a kid?
I mean, I just basically was taken to these bluegrass festivals, these multi-day events that were brand new, and you did sleep for 3 days. Yeah. And you jammed with other people, and you listened. You played the songs that you had heard on record or heard on the radio or just seen on stage, and you just learned them as you went. And I did take lessons. There wasn't anyone like by that point. I already knew more than my dad did because he didn't have a chance to play, and you just sort of learn while you're doing it. Yeah, I would watch people. And so again, by being in person at these festivals and events, shows, seeing other people play, you just watch and you just absorb and you just try to do what they're doing. Right. That was just, it was very organic.
So what was the first band situation you were in?
Well, the first band was this band that I mentioned that my dad had bought the bass for. It was called Tom Trout and the Bluegrass Neighbors, and they literally lived about a mile away. And it was a family, the dad and 2 sons and daughter, Kathy, who was close to my age. And she was a great singer and great mandolin player. And then Ray Shreve played fiddle with us, and a couple of other folks joined in as well, depending on the gig. So that was... it was their band, and we just sort of like crashed it. And then when I started playing bass with them instead of my dad, we just played around regionally. And then from then, I played in a lot of different bands regionally. Just I basically spent my whole youth when every weekend I was playing gigs instead of doing what kids do, Yeah. And then by the time I got to be, 13 or 14 years old, I was playing bar gigs. I was playing in bars I wasn't old enough to be in. I was always, supervised with some official adult, but most of the time my parents, but sometimes not. Sometimes they couldn't be there, but I would go anyway, and I had a series of very responsible people that were in charge of my well-being, and I just went and played gigs for,
as the bass player.
Oh yeah. And everything from what would be considered sort of newgrass stuff at the time to more traditional stuff. I played in a gospel band. This was more of like an early traditional bluegrass country with a bit of a country edge to it, like early country kind of gospel, going and playing at churches for a Wednesday night service. Okay. And then everybody giving donations, and then everybody ate.
Very social.
Very social, yeah. And it was interesting for me because actually I was raised Catholic, and we didn't do that. It was a very different vibe. Yeah. But my parents completely, they were so cool, and they were very liberal, and they very much encouraged me to go and be part of this because I got such a great education, not just from the music, but just to see how other people worshipped. And so that was very interesting for me.
So you've spent a good chunk of your career as a band leader. Was that something that you were interested in, like leading, fronting a band pretty early on, or were you more just focused on playing bass and being in a supporting role?
I guess it's the years have added up now that I've been a band leader, but I still feel like I was just, and I don't mean just, but I was more of a bass player for longer than I have been a band leader.
Yep.
Still. And yeah, I thought about it early on, but to be honest, when I was in my 20s or something, I thought of it, but I didn't see a path. So I couldn't even imagine that.
So
but,
you were pretty focused on playing the bass.
Oh yeah, no, okay. I was very
cool.
happy. I was happy to just play bass, and I keep using the word just but I don't mean it that way because it was very important to me, and I loved. And I still do. I love being like in the back line and having all the band in front of me and me just doing my thing. I love that role. Yeah. And in fact, if I could run the band doing that right now, like if I could sort of still do what I do, but do it from the back line, that would be actually fine with me. Uh-huh. But I just got to a point in my life where I realized I had a lot of ideas and a lot of music that I wanted to create or help create. And the only way that I was going to be able to do that would be to have my own band. And I knew it would push me in all the right ways, and it would push me out of my comfort zone. And then I waited a long, like really late. I was in my mid to late 40s before I did this. And that was also very scary because I was like, oh, what the heck am I doing?
Sticking your name on it.
Yeah, it's like, what if this doesn't really work at all? And what am I doing? So, but at the same time, I knew I needed to do it because it would have been a huge regret if I hadn't.
As far as the bass stuff goes, who along the way would you say were, like, aside from the people that you've already mentioned, like from your local scene, who were some of the kind of prominent bluegrass bass players that influenced you as far as a player goes and like kind of led the way for you to be able to play the way that you do?
Well, of course, I mentioned Tom Gray, but then things happened in those formative years with bluegrass, especially Tony Rice and David Grisman, particularly, and Sam Bush. But I was mostly drawn to the upright bass. So when Tony and David Grisman started playing things known as dog music, the bass players that they were bringing in kind of like just changed everything. Like the record Manzanita, Tony's, which isn't dog music per se, but it was a pivotal album for everyone in the whole world should be. And but that what was unique to me about that record and the bass was that they were playing kind of like they were doing some seldom seen songs, like Old Train, and they were doing some bluegrass covers, some like early traditional bluegrass music, doing it their way. And then there was Todd Phillips, and the way he was playing bass on that record, the groove that he created really had not been created before. In combination, like obviously he and Tony are playing off each other, and and the mandolins are also creating that groove. So it's not just one person, but that groove that exists on things like "Hold What You Got," which was a Jimmy Martin song, and the first version of that is very different than the Manzanita version.
Right.
So that groove. And that was a life-changing moment for me to hear that.
Hearing that record.
Oh, yeah.
Did you see that group in that era?
Oh, yeah.
You did?
Yeah. I got to see him. I didn't get to see Todd Phillips play that often because he was a West Coast person and he didn't come.
He's a California guy?
I know that I think he was living out there then. I think that he is originally from there, but I don't know exactly where he's originally. But I think he was living out there. I had seen Tony play, with the Bluegrass Alliance before he joined with J.D. Crowe, and I'd seen Tony when Tony was playing with Sam Bush and the Bluegrass Alliance, and I'd seen them play in person, and I had seen all of these different configurations and loved them every single one.
What was it about that record? Like, what was it with the bass playing on that record?
Some of it is just like some of the lines that he played, some like with like a ascending and descending blues lines that he put in the middle of like "Ho, What You Got" or something like that. Not so much what the notes were, but it was again the push and the pull, the feel. Mm-hmm. It had more of a bounce to it, and in some songs, and then in other songs, he'd let those notes ring out a little bit long, which was also very unusual for the time.
Yeah,
and which is very sort of almost jazz centric kind of thing to do.
Was he a jazz guy background wise?
Well, he played mandolin, but I think he definitely had
some of that in his back pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was another record that also introduced me to straight ahead jazz, and by way of just because of the bass player, and that was the record doesn't have a title; it just has all their names on it, and I call it the White Album.
The other White Album.
Yeah, the other one. But it has Sam Bush and Tut Taylor and Jethro Burns and Norman Blake and David Holland and Vassar Clements on it. And I got a hold of it at a festival somewhere because they used to come and set up, boxes and boxes and boxes of LPs, and you could just go and get all the LPs. Anyway, I got a hold of that record, and it's mostly instrumental music, except that Norman Blake sings a couple of tunes on it. And so you've got like these players that I knew, and then
you weren't aware of Dave Holland at that point?
No, I didn't know who Dave Holland was. And I knew Vassar, but Vassar at that point was definitely like he was a Nashville star.
He was like a rock star.
He's like a rock star. Yeah. And so, and then there was this person playing somebody named Dave Holland. I had no idea. Yeah. And I listened to that record, and then it was like, okay, this is an element that I know, this music I know, with this kind of approach on bass. Right. Again, mind blown.
Yeah.
It's like how this can be. And then Rob Wasserman playing with David Grisman.
Did you hear that Dave Holland, John Hartford record?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I love that approach of having guys sort of from like different backgrounds that clearly Dave Holland had a deep love for bluegrass, but it definitely wasn't his first thing that he did, but what he brought to it was pretty wild. But I gotta look for the White Album. So is it available out there?
It's not really. I've looked for it lots of times. Yeah, it's really hard. It's completely out of print, but I can make you a copy.
Sounds great. Let's just talk about you as a band leader with the bass. There's a propulsiveness that comes from bass in bluegrass that some people can do it really well, some people don't do it as well. You've definitely got that. Are you consciously aware of driving the band when you're leading your own band more than, if you were just hired to play bass for somebody else's band? Like, do you feel like you're kind of steering the ship?
I don't know. I don't think of it as more of like with my band than any other setting. But I'm constantly. Well, first of all, I don't necessarily think of it as steering the ship anytime, because I feel like it has to be this collaborative thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just constantly thinking of trying to land in the right place.
Yeah.
That's all that thought alone, that single thought absorbs my entire being.
Right. I mean, a lot of bluegrass bass playing is quarter notes, like when you really get down to it. Not that it's just that, but the basic groove of it is often quarter notes. But how that quarter note sits in the music really depends on the player, I find. And when you hear somebody like Mike Bub or like you, that those notes have more weight to them, to me, as a co-player, somebody that doesn't play the instrument, or Dennis Crouch or somebody. Like, the groove is massive because they just have a way of like pushing those notes forward that's not just playing the note.
Well, I would, yeah. I mean, like all of those people I know pretty safely can say that they're emulating people like Roy Huskey and Junior Huskey and Bob Moore,
Yeah.
who landed those notes like just 1-5, but it wasn't so much about how many notes, but where they put them, and
and the length of it, and just the way
and
that
the
it
length
lands.
of it, and the way it lands, and that is, folks like Bob Moore and Junior Huskey and then Roy Huskey. When I came to town, Roy Huskey.
You must have seen those guys, right?
I didn't get to see like Bob Moore, probably just more of missed opportunities. But I did get to meet Roy Huskey Jr. and he was here when I first moved to town, and I did get to see him play, and that was amazing. He actually really liked my bass and wanted to buy it.
Really?
And because he said he had a lot of basses. Like I think he was a kind of a bit of a collector, and he said that he had never seen one just like this one. And I know that it's one of the few left of that era. But of course, I'm like, well, you can play it anytime you want, but it belonged to my dad, and I'm not going to ever sell it. And then, I think he kind of took offense. He basically did.
Really?
Oh yeah. Like I'm exaggerating, but it was kind of a thing. Like after a while, it was like when he would see me, he would just say, "Are you going to sell me your bass?" And I was like, "No, no, Roy, I'm never going to sell you my bass." And
that's funny.
And another story about making the decision to move here. Mark Schatz, who also was like a really.
He was everywhere back in those days too, probably, right?
Yeah,
like he seemed to be
I
playing on everything in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, and even in the late 70s, I saw him play with like Bela with in bands that were touring in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. So I got to know him a few years later, and we became friends. And he moved down here before I did, like in the mid 80s, and he started saying, "You need to come to Nashville." And I was like. The first time he said it, I was like, why in the world would I want to move to Nashville? Because this was before it became like this inviting place for this kind of music. And he said, "Oh, no, it's like Sam's here and Jerry's here and Bela's here and everybody, you really need to come." And so eventually, my husband and I did move a few years later, and I remember saying when I saw Mark the first time after moving here, I was like, "Hey, man, I did it. We moved." And he goes, "You shouldn't have come."
I was kidding.
And I was like, "What?" And he kind of laughed, but he's like, "It's, Roy's got it all tied up. Yeah, there's nothing. There's no work."
Really?
And, I tease him about that now. But, I wasn't planning on being like a studio musician anyway. I was always interested in just touring. And
was that never a thing for you?
To be a studio?
Yeah.
Well, I've done a lot of recording, but I never went after that because I really loved the traveling and touring.
Yeah.
And because, Roy had it all sewed up.
like literally, he was the guy. Everyone just called Roy.
Well, yeah, for a while. Oh, of course, yeah. He was on thousands of them, of records, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. That's a whole different world. As you know, studio recording it's just another thing. These days, I could be, I think, comfortable doing a whole lot more of it. But even still, I would miss the live performance so much better. I really enjoy that. I love the energy from the audience, and then people like Dennis Crouch have carried that torch on, that Roy Huskey torch, big time. And I don't know, like if he would probably credit Roy. I don't know. I won't put words in his mouth, but Roy and Bob Moore for sure, because that's who he sounds like. Yeah, and that's, I think, the interesting thing that I notice is that some of the absolute greatest musicians, bass players that ever existed, are not, those names are not household names.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy, isn't it?
It is crazy.
Especially somebody like Bob Moore, who, yes, he was an upright bass player, but like he played on a ton of popular music too.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's relatively unknown.
It is. And honestly, I mean, like, I've been teaching for years and teaching workshops, and I have my online artist work school, but for years and years and years, and still happens when I start talking about who people, my students are always, who should I listen to? And I start with the list, and I'm saying Roy Huskey, and they're like writing it down because they've never heard that name before. But honestly, a lot of people don't know who Dennis Crouch is. He's like the greatest player ever.
Yeah.
And all the musicians and the producers and the people who are making things happen know who he is. But I mean, just like the average Joe out there listening, the fans, they don't know that name, but they've heard him.
Oh, yes, they have. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to making your own records, how do you like that process? Like you said you really ultimately prefer playing live. So the studio thing, when it comes to you doing a Missy Raines record, is that something that you get excited for, or does it just feel like something you got to do to keep the ball rolling, or like how does it land in your world?
I mean, I love the end result.
Yeah.
I don't always enjoy the process.
Okay, so let's talk about your new record. So Highlander came out, what, a couple of weeks?
February 9th.
Okay. So tell me about the process of making it, as far as you've got some guests on it and stuff, but essentially it's your live touring band, right? Mm-hmm. It's time to make a record. Is somebody harassing you saying, hey, come on, we need a new record? Or is it something that you just feel like it's time to do it? Or what makes you want to make it?
Oh, that person harassing is me.
Okay.
You know, yeah.
Beating yourself up.
Oh, yeah. With the band. And, you know, it takes me a long time to do things just in general, but then you add in pandemics and things like that. It tends to slow the process down. So it's been a couple of years since I had a record out, and I knew that I desperately wanted to get this record done as fast as possible, and it sometimes just feels like it's moving like molasses. But I do love a lot of the process about it. I remember what it was like to make analog records. Mm-hmm. And now we make digital records for the most part. There was something a little bit more about making like an analog record when you were actually like rolling tape, and it cost a lot of money.
Yep.
And you had to get it right. And if your engineer, if you were going to punch something, it was going to be like a really big decision if you're going to punch it or not.
It's a different mindset, for sure.
A different mindset. And that part of it, it's more nerve-wracking, but it's more like a live show. So it felt, I kind of enjoyed that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Now when we make digital records, it's like there's nothing that you can't do. There's nothing that you can't
just tell everyone you're working on tape. You can't do that. You're not fixing anything.
That's right. Yeah. There's really nothing that you can't change or fix. And although for this record, I mean, we left a lot of it just the way it was. Like I left it as raw as I could leave it. But
so where'd you do it? Was this something you did at home, or?
We recorded the tracks at Compass Records, and my husband Ben Surratt
I love that room.
Engineered. Yeah,
that room has a wicked vibe to it.
It does. I love the history there. I love that this is where all the renegades of Nashville ended up, in that building, and this is where I am because it fits. It feels perfect, and. So we recorded most of the tracks there, or all of the tracks there. But then we did a lot of overdubs at our studio.
Okay. So you got the core tracks done.
Yeah.
At Compass,
right? And
which was Hillbilly Central for any outlaw country nuts out there. What sort of tracking situation did you do? Like, did you kind of set up as if you were just sitting around the living room, or did you have isolation booths going, or they have options there? how did you guys set
They
up?
did. We went with isolation because it just feels kinder to everybody. That way you don't have to feel like. Although we went in knowing what it was that we were doing because we'd been playing this music out on the road. I have done records where we're all sort of live and in the same room, and there's bleed, and there's no room for like if you have to do it again, everyone's doing it again. But we chose to do it with isolation.
Yeah. When you do it isolated like that, do you prefer to play to a click, or do you guys just go for it in the air, or how do you do for that?
We do have the click.
You do?
It's a suggestion.
Yeah.
In other words, like if the track ended up feeling like super great, but it didn't maybe stick with the click, if it felt great, then we're going to use that track.
Right.
But we have it there, but not everybody's like maybe has it turned up, and so we're playing off of each other.
Yeah.
It also, again, that helps when you have guests that come in maybe later to do parts. It's also kind of a tool of the day where it actually just ends up being a way to make it a smoother process when we were making records the way we are making them now.
Yeah.
Which is sometimes the guests aren't in the same room at the same time as when you lay down the original track.
What about your vocals? Were you doing vocals live, or did you overdub those, or how'd you approach that?
I would do a scratch vocal, but then I went back in and re-sang them.
So how do you do that with your bass being recorded?
I have a really great engineer.
Okay.
And seriously, but also I didn't really recut hardly any bass, so I guess he just did
Got rid of it somehow.
Yeah.
So you didn't keep any, like the live vocals were all done strictly as a guide.
Oh, yeah.
But all the bass stuff you kept. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think. There might have been a couple of things that we had to redo over the bass because of something, but I don't think so. In fact, what I was thinking one time, not too long ago, was I was thinking that the bass, maybe not solos and stuff for the bass, but the actual track, so much of that, I'm the one that never gets to do my part over.
Right.
It seems like I feel like I spent all this time, like everybody gets, I want to tweak this, I want to tweak that. I'm like, okay. And then, but I never end up like doing a lot of the bass over. And I've done that for several records. And it's not necessarily because it was so great going down. It's just that it was fine. And we have all these other things to do. So
there's some nice bass features on there. But yeah, like you don't take gigantic bass solos as a general rule, but there are lots of fills and like cool moments and stuff where you do sort of step out maybe more than the average bass player because it's your band and you're kind of featured in that way.
You mean the extra like little solos and this stuff?
Yeah.
So those, and those wouldn't even be there if it hadn't been for Alison Brown.
Oh, really? She was egging you on?
Oh, yeah. So she was doing her job, doing it really well because she was pushing me. And I was like, I wouldn't put a bass solo here. And she's like, no, we have to have a bass solo here. And
there's a couple moments too where you kind of like go into the slapping thing, but it's not really a part of the song. It's like suddenly you're kind of doing that. I can't remember what song it is.
Probably on Diesel Blues.
Mm-hmm. Is that something that do you plan that kind of thing out, or does it just happen?
I will say that I knew I wanted to do that on that song, but I didn't do it the day we tracked. I did go back in and add those slaps back in because I wasn't trusting myself I didn't want to throw off everybody else, and I didn't want that clack, 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 clack thing to make somebody else not do something that they might do.
Right.
And so, and I didn't trust myself to like nail it every time. So I was like, okay, I really want to do this, and if it works with what everyone else lays down, then I will like go in and overdub it on a couple places. And then so when I went back in and overdubbed the double, triple slap thing on a couple things, I did it in all these places. And then I listened to it and I was like, oh gosh, that's just way too much. So then I took out some of the stuff. So that is the beauty of being able to sit on sit on a record for a little bit and just be able to listen to it and go, no, that doesn't work, and then change it, go back to the way it was originally.
Was Allison producing pretty much the whole thing, or were you guys co-producing it, or how was that?
Well, she definitely produced it, but it felt very co-produced because mainly because she just so much honors and respects, my vision and who I am. And so, I felt at all times that if I felt strongly about something, I could speak up. But on the other hand, I trust her,
Does she play on it too?
Yeah, she plays the second banjo on Are You Ready to Say Goodbye?
Oh, okay.
And so Eli's playing...
he's your regular banjo player?
Yeah.
What's his last name?
Gilbert.
Okay.
And he's playing the banjo. He's playing banjo on everything. But we had the opportunity to play at the Red Hat in Raleigh, North Carolina for the IBMA World Bluegrass Festival in last October. And we were paired together with Allison. She got up and played some songs with us. And so we invited her to play on that song on stage. Well, when she did it, she started playing such a super cool, 7-chord thing. I don't know. She played all this really cool, just typical Allison. She heard what Eli was playing and then just played this complimentary thing right with it. And it was so great. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. And we'd already cut the song. The song was pretty much done. And we were getting close to when we needed to have everything done in the last fall. And we were really cutting up on the edge of it. And I remember just looking at her and saying, will you play banjo on this song? Would you? And it's like the 11th hour, and it was like, will you please do what you did on stage? And she's like, yeah. And so she just did it, and we now refer to it as basically our rock opera,
right,
because of the banjos. It's just massive.
Yeah. Who else guests on the record? So Rob Ickes plays on. What's that song?
He plays on Panhandle Country, which is
right,
the instrumental along with Bronwyn, Keith Hines.
Yeah.
And then
is she somebody you've played with a lot?
No, I haven't got to play with very much, and so I've really enjoyed getting to do this record. Have her be on the record.
Yeah, she's great.
Also on the record, well, you've got the singers. You've got Danny Paisley, Dudley Connell from the Johnson Mountain Boys, which was another Mid-Atlantic band from that area. Kathy Mattea on Who Needs a Mind, fellow West Virginian. And
do you go way back with her too, or is it more of a recent Nashville thing that you got to know her?
No, I mean, honestly, I'd love to say I have this relationship with Kathy, but I just admire her from afar mostly, and she's Allison. I have met her several times at events at the Mountain Stage and the Charleston, West Virginia events that we've both been a part of, the West Virginia Music Hall of Fame events that we've both been a part of, but she's been very nice. But yeah, she was very gracious to come and do this. And then Lori Lewis is singing on it.
Oh, nice. Yeah, right.
And then fiddle players. Basically, we have an extra banjo player, Allison, and then we've got all the fiddle players.
So who's the fiddle player in your band?
Ellie Hawkinson.
Okay.
And in addition, so we have twin fiddles on one song with Ellie and Michael Cleveland.
Yeah.
And then we have triple fiddles with Ellie and Darol Anger and Shad Cobb.
Whoa. That's a heavy lineup right there.
Oh, my gosh. It was – and that's on Diesel Blues.
Yeah.
And then, of course, double fiddle, twin fiddles with Ellie and Bronwyn on Panhandle Country. And
who says what this song needs is triple fiddles? Whose call was that?
Oh, well, we all wanted it.
Okay.
We all wanted it, but we definitely thought it would be a great opportunity. And
did they do it together?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to overdub, really. You kind of need that to happen organically.
That was one of the highlights of the recording, because when we were doing These Old Blues, we decided it would be really killer to have triple fiddles, and we thought about who we were going to get, and we made the calls, and basically once Allison had, got everybody arranged at Darol and Shad to come at a certain time for that day, she turned around and said, "We're getting puppies at 2:00." That's what it felt like. We were getting these puppy fiddle players.
Exciting.
It was like and we were so excited. Ellie was so excited, and then Danny came in and sang, and he came down to sing it, and which was really sweet of him. To not just opt to do it, remotely. He was able to come down, and so it was a great experience.
So when you record your bass, do you get hung up on your sound and how you mic it and all that kind of stuff, or do you just kind of go with whatever the engineer sticks in front of you?
Well, I'm married to the engineer.
Yeah, right.
So I would say that I think I have some control, but I actually I leave it. He is more concerned about it actually than I am.
Yeah.
And so
You must know that bass so well. I mean, that's the only one you've really ever used?
yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I've recorded with other basses, but they were really bad, and so, because there's a whole story that one. It was incapacitated for a little while.
Oh.
Ben knows this bass really well. He knows the rooms. He has done lots of other projects at Compass as well as at our house, and so he knows it so well that I just don't even. I mean, I certainly listen when I'm listening to it, and if I don't like something, I'll say, I don't like this, or do something about it.
Yeah.
But I don't get, I don't spend time thinking about what it is that he's doing.
Right.
Because I don't have to.
Yeah.
And so I feel
The sign of a good engineer.
Yeah. So it's great, but I've been around. I've done other recordings in town, and Ben worked with some great. I worked with Vorndick and Rich Adler, and some really great engineers. And lately, Sean Sullivan, and folks like that. And those guys, you just don't. You don't have to worry. You have to think about it because they know what they're looking for, and the best engineers will they'll listen to your instrument from sitting in front of it to see where the sweet spots are, and they'll also ask you what do you like to do? What do you want it to sound like? And so I think we're as musicians, we're responsible to be able to contribute something to the idea of what it is we want. But on the other hand, it's not really our job to know how to get it done. So we need to let those who have studied that, let them do their thing.
Right. How long is the process for you for making, say, this new record? Do you guys rip it off in a couple days, or?
Oh, no. I mean,
what about the main, the session at Compass? Was that 4 or 5 days or something?
Yeah, we probably put in, 4 to 6 days or something tracking, and then overdubs.
That part goes on a bit when it's a little more unlimited as far as
yeah. So there's the good and the bad about having a studio at your house is that
tell me about it.
It could go on forever until you just say, okay, we have to stop. Yeah. So there's that. But
and do you get involved in the mixing stuff, or do you leave that up to?
Oh no, yeah.
You're in deep.
Not deep, but I do leave most of that to Ben, and then, but I always listen, and then our process, like I said, Allison and Ben and I have done this a couple of times now, and Ben does all the heavy lifting, gets it in
Mixes at your place, or do you go to the Compass to do that?
No, he does it at our place, and he's done a lot of sound improvement into their studio and to make it better. So it's as good a reference as possible.
Yep.
He does all the heavy lifting, and then I listen, and then I make a few tweaks, and then we tweak it again, and then he takes it to a couple of different studios in town that he knows really well, and makes tweaks. And then we go to Compass and listen with Allison, and
cool.
And then she makes tweaks, and then we're done.
Great.
Yeah, so it's a pretty good process.
You don't make records that often. Do you think you'll do another one in the next while, or do you just feel like, okay, I'm done with that. We're good.
No. This time I'm already thinking about the next one. Of course, I'm always already thinking about the next one, but my intention is to make one as fast as possible.
Oh, cool.
Mainly because I just want to use this band again, and I don't want any of them sneaking off before I can do another record. So I'm hoping to do that.
The other record I was listening to today, which is really cool, the New Frontier record from whatever it was, 2019.
2013.
13. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes. It's one of my favorite records that I've
That's
ever
a
done.
great sounding record.
Thank you.
But wildly different from...
Yes.
And bluegrass is notoriously like unforgiving for people that do other things. Was that like a whole issue?
Oh, yes.
It was?
Yes.
Okay.
That record was produced by Ethan Ballinger and me and Ben, and Ethan played with me for years.
In 2013? God, Ethan must have been like 15.
12.
Oh.
Yeah. No, because he's brilliant, and he was brilliant then. And
So he was in your band?
Mm-hmm. He joined my band. He was the very first mandolin player in the New Hip, which was a different band than Allegheny and different vibe, different focus. Yeah. But he was in still going to school in Belmont, played mandolin, and he was the youngest. I think he was 19 when he joined the band, and then went on to. It was funny. We lost a guitar player, and every now and then he would say, "Well, I can play guitar if you want." I was like, "Oh, okay, that's great." And I knew he could, I knew he would be good, but I thought he was like dedicated and wanted to be a mandolin player. Like I didn't know. Is he a pretty
bluegrassy mando player? Like I've never even heard him play mandolin.
He was. He's not like a Tristan Scroggins kind of bluegrass player. No, mandolin player. But he was good. He was more like he had been studying with Matt Flinner. So that was the and that was honestly exactly Matt Flinner was that was who I wanted the mandolin to sound like. That's what I was basing it from. Yeah. And so I was just thinking like he wants to be a mandolin player, but he's just being sort of, you're just being very generous by saying I could play guitar for you. Well, I didn't know that he was really like kind of a guitar player, like a great guitar player, but more importantly, like that I think aspirationally, like I don't think he ever really wanted to be a mandolin player, but that was the gig that was presented itself. So anyway. He ended up, we couldn't find a guitar player, and he's like, yeah, I'll play guitar. And when I heard him play, and then by this point we're playing like, he's like playing plugged in, you know. And I was like, okay, that's it. You're the guitar player. Like we have found a guitar player. Were
you touring and doing that kind of stuff at that point? Mm-hmm. That was decidedly not bluegrass, that was more like singer-songwriter-y kind of, I mean, there's a bluegrass element to it, but it's certainly not traditional at all.
It wasn't traditional, and yes, I was touring that, and it was called the New Hip. It wasn't traditional bluegrass by any means. However, in my mind, it was very relatable to bluegrass because one of the after me and the bass, the main thing that I thought of about the instrumentation was who's going to play mandolin, and who's going to play mandolin because mandolin was the most bluegrass. That's the thing for me. It was like Monroe, and then there was like John Duffy, and there was Sam Bush and David Grisman, and all these mandolin players had been bigger to me than, or just as big as bass player influences for me. More so, honestly, than even maybe the banjo. So for me, the New Hip was built around the bass and a certain style of mandolin playing, kind of Grisman kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I also, the idea with the New Hip was I didn't want to have to worry about categorization at all. I just wanted to play whatever I wanted to play, whatever song I wanted to play, but with these instruments.
Right.
And we were just going to play it, and it was going to be good. And I didn't see it as a departure from bluegrass. I just thought of it as, here we are with these instruments and we're going to play this music.
I can totally relate to that. But I can also see how, like, pulling into a bluegrass festival, you would get in a lot of trouble.
Oh, my gosh. You have no idea.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
So that was a thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean.
So what happened to that project?
Well, I mean, I made.
Because it's great.
Well, thanks. Yeah. I mean, I made a couple of records, but.
Is there another one that's sort of.
There was a record before New Frontier called Inside Out. And,
okay, I don't know that one.
And to be fair, that record was like way less focused, and it was just sort of like, okay, these are the songs we're doing right now, and I didn't know what I was doing in terms of producing and creating a project at the time. Brand new band, didn't know I didn't know what I was doing, trying to lead a band. I didn't have a clear idea of the whole any song will work kind of thing. It does work it's conceptually, but you still have to have a bit of a focus. Yeah. And so there was Inside Out, which still has some great music on it. But then some of the band members changed around and went through formations. And then Ethan was there. He's still there because Ethan was also on Inside Out, but he's playing mandolin.
Okay.
And then I started the visions became a lot clearer to me, honestly. And I was very late to the game, but I started listening to Radiohead, and that changed my world. Mm-hmm. And I listened to In Rainbows, and that changed everything for me. And
from like a songwriting point of view, or more like a
sonically, and of course Ethan, had pretty much introduced me to that. And so when we went into the studio, I asked him to produce the record and New Frontier, and I'd been given some great songs. The song New Frontier and written by Zach Bevel, and he made this beautiful, sonically beautiful album. Yeah. And it remains it's like a little precious thing to me at this point. To me, it isn't bluegrass. Of course, it's not traditional bluegrass by any means, but I never felt like I left anything because I'm still me that. And I'm still playing. I'm still a bluegrass bass player from West Virginia, and I still have that sensibility. But my greatest heroes all experimented and in varying ways, and I watched them do a lot. Those. I saw Sam Bush go from the Bluegrass Alliance to where he is, and Tony Rice from the Bluegrass Alliance to all the things that he went through. Yeah. The Osmond Brothers, I was there watching them, not from the beginning, but certainly saw them go through lots of changes as they tried to keep up with the country radio and all of that. I watched all of these people that I adored explore in Monroe. Oh my gosh, listen to the records that he made. So to me, it just felt like this is what bluegrass is. It's about innovation, and too, in addition to hanging on to a tradition. So I never felt like I left. But some people loved it. Some people did not. And I actually had an experience one time early on when I was touring with that band. They had heard some of the songs on the radio maybe, and there was drums. So there was that. But I mean, it wasn't the first person to have drums in bluegrass, but still. And I had a guy, we were playing in Los Angeles, and a guy comes up to me before the show, and he comes up and he says, puts out his hand and says, "Missy, I just want to say," he says, "I'm a huge fan." He says, and I've come tonight because I wanted to say goodbye. He said,
"Oh my God!"
I'm not kidding. He's very nice, but he said, "Yeah." He says, "I know that this is not my thing. Like what you're doing now is not my thing, and so, but I'm a big fan, and I think a lot of you, and I just wanted to say, thanks for all those years of all the great music." And I said, "Are you going to stick around for the show?" He goes, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to stick around for the show. But I probably won't be back because it's just, this isn't my thing. It's fine." He wasn't being mean. He was just like, "This is fine, but it's not my thing." Yeah. And, but I just want to say that. he watched the show.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he came up to me afterward. He says, "Oh, my God, I love this."
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he said, "I had no idea that it could be this way." And he said, "This is amazing. I love this." So
what instrumentation were you touring with? You had a drummer with you? And
in the very beginning, it was a drummer, guitar, bass, drums, dobro, and mandolin. And it then went to drums, mandolin, electric guitar, and hollow body electric guitar, and bass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then did you have to kind of like draw a line in the sand and just like go back to a more traditional bluegrass instrumentation like you have now?
Well, I got to a point where I realized that the idea of the new hip that had reached its point of like I didn't have any energy for it anymore. I didn't have any creative energy to put into it anymore, and that the idea of whatever it was need to be just sort of put on a shelf. So
That's cool. I like that.
I just kind of tried to just disband like that idea. Unfortunately, a lot of people still would see that I was playing somewhere and they would just assume it was the new hip gig or something. But I was at that time, the transition time, I was playing with like a trio. I basically ended up going out as a trio mainly because I couldn't afford to take more people out. Yeah. And I ended up going out with a fiddle player and a guitar player. In the very beginning, it was a couple different people and who went out with me, and that was really challenging because you're trying to make music that I had been doing with all these other instruments, trying to do it with these three instruments. Scaled down, and I didn't know exactly what new material I wanted to do, and I was still in early stages of writing. So it was a very big transitional period, and it was kind of a dead zone, and there was a lot of...
This is like 2016-ish?
Yeah, 2015, 2016, 2017, and I also experienced, my husband and I both experienced a lot of... we lost several family members during that time all at once, and it was brutal. It was just horrible, and so we were going through a lot, and honestly, I almost just stopped making music. I almost didn't make Royal Traveler, which was the next record I was about to make, but I did, and that was when I sort of gave myself to Allison. It was like I just produce me and let's just do something.
Do something, yeah.
And that record got nominated for a Grammy, and I almost didn't make it.
Amazing.
And so that's, that I think about that every now and then and catch my breath, but that gave me the momentum to then, okay, now what do I do? And then I was still sort of touring with a trio just because the album doesn't feature a band. It's just guests on every single track, and every single track is different. Yeah. And there's so many great tracks on there, but when you have a record where every single track sort of sounds differently, it's hard to tour it. It's hard to tour it. Yeah. It's hard for reviewers don't know what to do with it. Yeah. They like this song, but they might not like that song. So it just kind of percolates, and maybe that's it. So around that time, though, I started thinking, I just want to play bluegrass again, and that's when the idea for this started.
Cool.
Developing.
Yeah. Although I do love that too. Like I'd love to hear another record of the new hip kind of sound, which I thought was great. Thanks. It's a very cool record. Okay, well, I don't want to keep you forever, but do you have a minute to show me your bass?
Sure.
Can we look at that thing? That's a piece of bluegrass history right there. It's really beautiful, though.
The brass
etching.
Yeah, and so you can see it's engraved with flowers, and that's kind of what you would have on like a special order one.
Okay, so it was like a customized order.
Well, that's what we were not really. I think maybe, and then it's got this 3-piece.
The neck looks thin. Is it?
It's very thin, but that's characteristic of those early Ks. Okay. And then it also has,
Was it beat up like that when you?
Oh yeah, it looked exactly like this, and it has the real purfling. This has been repaired. This is repaired, but pretty much these notes, whoever the family that owned it in West Virginia. They bought it, and I don't know what their story was. I wish I could find out, but they antiqued it. So they put this dark stain on it, and then
yeah, that looks like a non-normal finish.
Yeah, because what it actually looks like underneath is, well, this is this is the curly maple that's underneath.
The
all
back
of this.
is just trash.
Yeah.
What did they do to it?
They antiqued it, so they painted it this color, and then they put the stain of this brown stain over it, so that it looks like this.
And then there's a couple 16th notes on the upper bouts.
Yeah, and then on the bottom.
Down there too. That wasn't you that put those on?
No.
Okay, that was the original.
This is the way it is, and this is me. I've done this.
So that's
all my thumb.
Thumb wear. Okay.
And I'm eating away at this is very sad. I'm eating away at the.
That's got some mojo to it.
Yeah. I mean.
Strings on it, or are they?
No, there's steel. Yeah, but you can make it. You can kind of give it that gut sound a little bit. It
really does sound like you've got strings on the low strings.
Yeah,
but you don't. So all that thumb wear on the bout.
Yeah.
Is that like? Do you rest your thumb on the?
I've had.
When you. Like how did that get so worn?
So we have taken some video, and so what's happening is I'm just hitting it like this with either my knuckle of my thumb or
on the way to pluck.
Yeah, just I don't know.
Love it.
It's like a hummingbird. I mean, it's like you have to slow down because like it's not that my hand's moving that fast. It's just that I haven't really paid much attention to what it is that I'm doing there, but because it's actually like it's not just the finish moved away, but there's actually a little divot there.
Oh yeah.
You can feel it, but yeah, and I get in trouble sometimes if I play somebody's pristine bass because if I play it for very long, I'm gonna scratch it up.
Right.
So I try not to do that.
They see your bass and they're like, ah, baby.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
For coming and doing this.
Telling you everything in the world. Thank you.
Music Makers and Soul Shakers is a bi-weekly podcast produced at the Hen House Studio in Nashville, Tennessee. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. You can also find us at makersandshakerspodcast.com. Thanks again to our sponsors this season, Larrivee Guitars, Fishman Pickups, Chase Bliss Pedals, Union Tube and Transistor, Spectra 1964, and the Hen House Hang. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.